Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcasts with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more. Coming to Dallas, Texas, September 14th, 15th, and 16th, 2018, the Blockchain and Future Tech Expo. This is going to be a gigantic conference of over 5,000 people. We're going to be talking about blockchain and its applications. We're going to be talking about quantum computing, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and several other future technologies that are poised to and actually changing our lives as we speak. Here's why you should attend. As you may know, early adopters are the ones that investigated and profited from things like the gold rush in the 1800s, from the dot-com boom in the 1990s, from the internet boom in 2005, from the smartphone explosion in 2007, from the real estate boom that ended in 2008, and of course, from the Bitcoin boom that started in 2012. Early adopters act now. They don't wait till later. They go out west first. In their covered wagons, they find the biggest gold nuggets. If you consider yourself an early adopter and you want to find the biggest nuggets, then you owe it to yourself to attend this upcoming conference. Blockchain is going to affect how we control and store our medical data, how we send money around the world, how we bank, and more. But artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and cybersecurity will play a pivotal role in our lives as well. And that's why our next event, September 14th to the 16th at the Dallas Convention Center, is going to have not only 5,000 plus attendees, but will showcase blockchain, AI, cybersecurity, quantum computing, and more. You want to get in on the coming gold rush of future tech and opportunity as an early adopter. Don't be left out. To register, go to bftexpo.com. That's blockchainfuturetechexpo.com. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. My guest is Garrett. He's a faculty member at Singularity University, and he does a wide range of work on his own, consulting for the World Bank. And his main area appears to be the long-term implications of technology and global trends. So, Banning, how you doing?
Great. Nice to be here, Richard.
Yeah. So, anyone I talk to from Singularity, and they seem to attract really high-end people that have a lot of interest in a lot of things. So I can't ask you about everything you do because you do too much, I'm sure. But what are some things you're working on that you'd like to highlight and you'd like to talk about?
Well, I've been concerned for a long time with looking at long-term global trends, and the kind of trends I'm talking about are environmental, climate change, demographic change, globally, specifically the expanding population and population of cities, urban regions, looking at resource constraints, conflict, geopolitics, all those areas, and then looking at the impact of technology, especially accelerating technology. As the Singularity people always like to talk about exponential technologies, meaning technologies that are developing at an exponential pace. So what is the impact of those technologies on the world, but also on the challenges we face from the long-term trends, most of which are quite negative in my view. So they're posing great challenges to us going forward. And my sense is that if we can't harness technology to address these problems, we won't be able to sufficiently respond to them, and we will have a very bad century. So that's been my area of interest. I've worked with the National Intelligence Council on their global trends reports they do every 4 years that are unclassified long-term trends. We've gone around the world talking to people in some 20 countries over the last decade, trying to get their input on how they see global trends. And then I've spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley and in Boston talking with technology people, trying to get their sense of where technology is going. And then the challenge is to sort of put it together and make sense of where we are and where we might go, both alternative futures as well as the sort of business as usual trajectory that we seem to be on.
So how do you express your outlook? Do you look at it as like what's going to happen in the next 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, or how do you break it down into the various outlooks you have?
Well, I try to look at longer term trends, maybe out 10, 20, 30 years, maybe to the mid-century is probably kind of a benchmark period to look at, because we see, I mean, especially the growing population on top of everything else. We already see that we have a serious impact of climate change on many areas of the world, especially in Africa, the Middle East, even China, and the United States. And all the assessments are that this is going to get much worse going forward, even if we do address the impact of carbon emissions and start to really reduce them. We still have a lot of carbon in the atmosphere that's going to affect the climate going forward for a long time. So this is a compounding factor when you adding 2 to 2.5 billion people to the global population by 2050. And all those people, the net gain is going to be in cities. And that net gain will be in cities in developing countries. So how do you do that? We're adding 70 million people a year to cities. That's 2 Tokyo regions a year. And we already have some very dysfunctional dystopian cities, the Karachis, the Lagoses, and many, many others. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to incorporate these people and have jobs and have healthcare and have reasonable shelter and all the things we need? This is a really big challenge now, but looking forward 10, 20, 30 years, it's going to get a lot more of a challenge. How do we feed all those people? Right now, we have trouble getting food to everybody on the planet, and we're going to increase the demand by 70, 100%. Same with energy. Demand is going to go up, but then producing energy that produced by fossil fuels means that you're adding to carbon, which means you're exacerbating the problem globally of climate change. So you really don't want to do that. How do you get the necessary water to people? We already have water shortages that are affecting at least 1 billion people. And so you look at all these challenges, and then conflict that comes from the famine, from the migration we see, especially in northern Africa and in the Middle East, where we have conflict that's been very much exacerbated by climate change, especially even the cause of the Syrian civil war seems to include the climate refugees into the cities. So we have a huge set of problems going already, and going forward, many of those are going to get much worse. So that's what I try to look at. It isn't necessarily 5 or 10 or 20 year specifically time frame, but it's a longer term set of trends that we have to deal with if we want to try to move civilization into what Singularity people call abundance, but abundance for all of food, good climate, water, shelter, jobs, et cetera. This is a huge challenge now, and it's only going to get a whole lot worse. And to me, that puts real pressure on the technology, not just the technology community, but the people. How do you actually take this technology and do something useful with it? How do you use technology to address the water problem, to address climate change, to address food provision, to address healthcare, housing in urban regions, all these issues? There are technologies that can help, but they require innovation, they require business models, they require policy, they require entrepreneurs, they require international institutions to help finance them. These are really gigantic set of problems, and I'm optimistic that we can address them, but I don't think that's what we're doing now in a rate that's going to solve the problems.
Well, you mentioned that there's cities that are already dystopian. What's dystopian about them? I'm just curious.
Well, you have cities where you have massive slums where people are living in squalid conditions. This breeds both crime and can breed disease. Right now we have a new outbreak of Ebola in Congo, Central African Republic. You get that into a city of 1 million, 2 million people, and suddenly you could get an Ebola that spreads very rapidly. Somebody gets it they're on an airplane, they bring it to the United States or Europe or wherever. This is a really big problem that's exacerbated by not having a good health system on the one hand, healthcare and public health, and then just having poverty. So that's part of the problem. I mean, you have lack of jobs, you have political discontent. You look at a lot of these cities, and they're pretty miserable places to live. And then you can look at Copenhagen and say, there you've got an amazing functioning city. Half the people ride bicycles. It's a very wealthy city. There's not the kind of poverty you see even in the United States. So, you have different kinds of cities. But the key point here is that 54% of human beings live in cities now, and that's 4 billion people. And we're going to add 2 or to 3 billion more people to cities. How do you do that to provide all the needs that are required? And how do you get governance? You've got these mega cities of 10, even 20, 30 million people. How do you govern those? How do you make sure everybody is secure, is fed, all that? I think it can be addressed, but I think you have to start with kind of a real clear look at what the challenges are ahead. And they're really huge. And I think that's where the technology community, which is coming up with all kinds of wonderful new technologies and cool stuff, but they're not often connected to the real problems. I mean, instead of starting with, oh, I've got a really cool technology, how can I sell it or, apply it someplace? What if we start with here's the problem. We have a lack of let's say, potable water in Africa in many, many places. How can you solve that problem? How can you develop, let's say, solar-powered, portable water purification systems that are easily maintained, that could be franchised? You can train people to do it. You can have the spare parts, et cetera, to keep those functioning so that you have clean water for people. Well, that's all technologically possible. But what's the link between somebody sitting in Silicon Valley comes up with nanofilters and somebody sitting in a village in Kenya that doesn't have clean water and the children are dying from waterborne diseases, et cetera? So the linkages there are really important. I mean, that's one thing I would credit Singularity University. The idea was, how do we take these technologies and harness them to deal with the global grand challenges like population growth, like poverty and health issues and education, environmental issues, a whole set of those issues, which are very similar to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. How do you really get that technology applied to the problem? And that's not a simple matter, and it's not going very well. Now,
I was going to ask you, is it the technology that's the issue, the deployment of it? But it sounds like it's really the deployment of it and the integration into actual need that's the holdback.
I think you're absolutely right, Richard. That's the problem. Awful lot of good technology to meet these challenges exists, but the models to actually get that technology deployed often don't exist, or they just are very, very weak. The entrepreneur, for example, I've known people who come up with nanofilters for water. Well, those people are sitting in Silicon Valley. They don't have a whole lot of money. They're trying to get their companies off the ground and go through the valley of death, et cetera. But they're not connected to anybody in the developing world, for example, who needs the water, the clean water. How do you connect those people up? And they don't know the people out there, and the people in the villages don't know the people with the technology. So that is a broken link that has to be addressed. I have a friend who has the Global Solutions Summit, which is going to be held in New York, June 4th, just before this Science and Technology Innovation Forum, the STI Forum of the United Nations, the 2 days following. And the Global Solutions Summit is trying to find a way of financing and these business models that may exist, but they're not scaled. And now I would say one of the exciting things about what's gone on in technology in really the last decade more than any other time is we have what we tend to call democratized technology. But as the technology has gotten more and more powerful, it's also gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And as you digitize things, you move towards zero marginal cost to produce them. So that means that you have access in Kenya, for example, in Africa, there are already, I don't know, it's 150 million smartphones, or of course probably nearly 700 million or close to a billion cell phones. But you have technology that has become so cheap it's available potentially everywhere. So you have ability to solve problems on a small scale but scalable approach. For example, as I said, take water. You could come up with, instead of building a gigantic water purification plant that might cost several $100 million and take 10 years to build, and then serve a pretty limited community, starting with the rich people. If you had scalable, small-scale machines that are solar-powered that cost a few $1,000s, serve maybe 1,000 people with fresh water, clean water every day, then you could scale that very quickly, just like you can do small-scale solar power on buildings, on homes, you could scale it up very quickly. Whereas if you're going to build a power plant, first of all, do you want to build a fossil fuel power plant, natural gas or coal? That's going to take, again, 5 or 10 years, $500 million or more to build that power plant. Whereas if you start small scale, but scale up with solar, for example, you can start meeting those needs for electricity very, very quickly. So that technology in so many areas now, and of course, Uberizing things with the connections that are provided by smartphones, makes possible a different kind of model of development, sort of bottom up, better, cheaper, faster, scalable approach to deploying technology and innovative business systems to scale up production very quickly, meeting these SDGs or whatever global grand challenges, rather than waiting for big top-down expensive efforts financed by the World Bank, run by governments that often are corrupt and taking a good chunk of the money and taking years to build the systems, which are going to be not only technologically outdated probably by the time they're built, but also just take so long that they're not going to be adequate to meet the growing need as you add, as I said, another couple billion people to cities. So there's a whole new way of approaching solving these problems that breaks really with the traditions of the World Bank, of most governments. It
sounds like it should be more guerrilla and decentralized.
Yes, distributed systems. In fact, the other thing I would argue here that I've been talking about what I call peak globalization. And what I mean by that is that I think we will reach a point at sometime in the next decade or two, I'm not sure when, but when the amount of physical stuff moving around the world, liquid fuels, food, products and container ships, toys, all that, the total amount is going to start to peak and decline as more and more energy, food, and product is produced at the point of consumption, which really means cities. If you go to renewable energy, of course, as everybody seems to forget to think about, is that the fuel is free forever. No one has a price on the sun. The price of oil, the price of gas does not affect you. You get free energy as long as, other than maintaining and building and maintaining the system. So you're no longer dependent on global supplies of sun, of wind. You create that energy source and deliver the energy locally. If you do more production of food, and I've just been finishing a report on that with a leading horticulturist on urban food technology enhanced ecosystems, linking rural, peri-urban, and urban systems with everything from just much better connection and more efficiency between the rural farmers and the consumers in cities to vertical farms, printed foods, plant-based foods, things that can be produced locally and consumed locally to reduce dependence on importing food and create good jobs in cities and really greatly improve the efficiency of production and distribution of food, which now globally is at least 30% of food is wasted. In the developing world, it's it never gets to the market. It dies one way, it perishes one way somewhere along the food chain. In the developed world, we throw it away or cull it. We don't like ugly foods that may be nutritious, but they don't look good, so you don't sell them in the supermarket. In any case, we're wasting a huge amount of food, and there are ways to using Uberized approaches to connect producers and consumers more efficiently to really enhance the ability to get food from where it's produced to where it's consumed. But we need to do more than that. We need to produce more food and do it locally. So that's possible. And then you have 3D printing.
One quick question. This seems like, again, a distributed solution.
Yes.
Is there a new genre of problem solving that you could call distributed problem solving? Is there a whole new line of thought that needs to be developed or is out there to solve these problems? It sounds like a lot of them have similar characteristics on how they could be solved better.
I think that what's missing is the bigger picture that I'm trying to outline to you right now of a systematic approach to it, that there's a possibility of addressing these problems with small scale but scalable distributed solutions to them. And it's an integrated system. If you have scalable solar that could support your greenhouses and your vertical farms in your cities, which could then be connected with 3D printing facilities to print out products that people need locally rather than shipping them from China. So yeah, you have to think of it systematically and see that there's a different future possible. The pieces are already there to some extent, and they're getting better. The technology is improving, and a lot of it's building the business models. I mean, you can envision, for example, what about an Amazon warehouse filled with machines, filled with 3D printers and other types of advanced robotics and advanced manufacturing machines, so that you send a file, could come from anywhere in the world, an STL file, a CAD/CAM file, to the printing facility, and it prints out the product for the local market. And if you look at it that way, see, the way we do manufacturing now for most things, whether it's iPhones or toys, they're made on assembly lines, and often in China. A great portion of it's in China. So they produce a lot of them, maybe thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of the same product. And of course, you can't distribute those locally. There's not a big enough market for 1 million of them, right? So you ship them all over the world. But what if your facility, instead of having to make 1,000 or 100,000 or 1 million of the same thing, every time it made something, it could be different, whatever's on demand locally. So your machines, your Amazon warehouse or whatever it is in Kigali or Lagos or Santiago, it gets the demand from the local market as to what's needed. And then the file is there and they print out the particular item. But the same machine that can make a plastic cup might be able to make a bed. I mean, make all kinds of different things. It's not limited to one item. That's why I call them sort of a universal manufacturing facility. So if you did that, then more, not everything, but more and more of the products that people need could be produced on demand at the point where they're consumed, not shipped all over the world and then have big inventories. A lot of it's wasted. Of course, the carbon emissions are huge. So it's a different model. The technology is there and getting much better. So if you thought that that's a vision you wanted to pursue, that's why I say sort of look at it systemically, look at the bigger picture and say, well, is this a better future for us in our city, our country, wherever, to go to where more of this we produce locally, from the energy and the food and products. If more of the product can be produced locally, then has all kinds of advantages, right? And it seems it's all possible, right? So if you're making decisions, that's the thing to think about, Richard, is that if we don't, as they say, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you. A vision that, let's say, you think it would be beneficial for a lot of reasons: economic, social, political, and jobs, inequality issues, by having more production locally of the things that we consume. And if you think that's a good thing, then as you plan and you think about the decisions your cities make or your entrepreneurs, you're building toward that vision, and rather than something else. You don't build. It's just like if you look at autonomous vehicles, for example, and you're a city planner, you're not going to build more Los Angeles. You're not going to build more parking lots and more roads. You're going to think, oh, gee, we could go to on-demand autonomous cars, at least within our city. So we better design our city to fit that possibility, which allows for much more green space, let's say, or just getting rid of the 50 or 60% of cities that are devoted to cars. We can reduce that. Our parking lots can be turned into vertical farms or something. So you want to be anticipating where the technology is going and where you would like to go, where you want to be. I mean, it's not like you just follow the technology wherever it goes. You say, okay, I want to have a city that's a country and a city that's doing more, producing things at the point where they're consumed and there's less waste, there's more responsiveness, there's more jobs, et cetera. So that's part of what we need to do, I think, is to get a bigger picture, look at where the trends are and what the possibilities are, and make choices of the technology we develop and deploy, and then the way we plan for it based on that kind of a vision. So I guess that's how I'm answering your question about distribution. It's a much more distributed system on the one hand in terms of small scale and scaled up, but you also need a vision of where the heck you're going.
Well, you may have a vision of it, but how do you train other people that you work with or depend on, investors, cities, government officials, et cetera, to see the vision and then help you act on it, not block you from it?
And I think that's obviously the big challenge. I mean, we're in a situation in the United States where, on a political level, we're going backwards and we're dismantling a lot of things that were going to address climate change and environmental pollution and a lot of other issues. So you can have policies, government policies, that are going in a very negative direction. So I think you need to be talking about the bigger vision of where you want to go and what's possible and what the implications are of going different paths. People are talking a lot about inequality, but they're not really talking about the economic structure or the kind of structure of production that I'm talking about, which might address that inequality issue or help resolve or reduce the inequality. So you need to have the bigger conversation, and you need to have people out there suggesting alternative futures of where we might be able to go that is desirable. Now, not everybody's going to like the vision, and certainly the oil producing countries are not going to benefit as we go towards renewable energy. They depend on exporting oil to us and natural gas, et cetera, and certainly the producers in this country are, if anything, very concerned about moving towards renewable energy that could cannibalize their profits. So it's not going to happen easily or overnight, but I think we don't tend to have a vision of where we're going, and the tech community doesn't have much of a vision. It just has a vision of AR is going to be really cool. VR is going to be neat. AI is going to have all these benefits, but for what? Where are we trying to go? What's the problem we want to solve? What kind of a opportunity we want to seize to make things better, to solve problems and have a better future? And how does technology help us do that? And I think that's what sort of tends to be what's missing. It's on the one hand, the people who know about the problems but don't know about technology don't really think about it. And then the technologists who don't really tie it to what human needs are and human problems are and how can we help solve them with those technologies. There's some people in universities, certainly people at Singularity and others, who are trying to make those linkages, but I don't think we've developed much of a vision yet or done it in a very systematic and effective way. And we haven't built the business models, particularly for the developing world, to capitalize, so to speak, on these technologies, which can really be transformative. And we've seen, just to make an example, I mean, look how fast the cell phone and then the smartphone distributed around the country. I mean, the smartphone really is 11 years old, right? And now there are probably close to 4 billion smartphones on the planet. That's amazing. So when the business model is there and people perceive that this is desirable, things can move very quickly. So part of it is having people see the opportunities and the need and putting the two together and coming up with new business models, government policies, capital. The VCs, there's a role for everybody in this, and civic organizations. So that's not a satisfying answer in the sense it's a complicated problem and a whole lot of different people involved, different interest groups and different parts of the society. But I think that the possibility is still there, and as we see the need, hopefully, people will step up with a vision and say, "Hey, this is a way we could go that will really be effective in meeting the challenges we face."
Well, what are some big successes? You said the cell phone, sure, but what specific problems do you see it solving? What are some of the successes we could point to and learn from to do this right?
Well, I think particularly the basic cell phone with SMS was the basis of M-Pesa, which is a mobile payment system that started in Kenya, and it's spreading. That particular system or ones like it are spreading throughout Africa and other parts of the world, which in countries, for example, I talked with a woman who's the head of EcoCash that she founded in Zimbabwe. And at the time that this is last summer, she told me there were only 1 million bank accounts for people in Zimbabwe, but 7 million people were using this EcoCash for online banking and money transfers. And that would give people access to banking, which we take for granted here. Everybody has bank accounts, right? But they don't have them all over the world. So suddenly the cell phone, which to us is maybe a communication device just to call people, becomes a device for banking, for online payments, and then for information. For if you want to know what fishermen were one of the early examples where they would use a cell phone to find out what the prices were on the fish at various parts of the food chain, so they didn't get taken by the local people who bought them from them when they didn't know what it was really worth. So
Right.
And even Facebook, we look at it in the United States as largely something for, your friends and family and communicating, with people on a social level. But this is an economic platform all over the world where people build a business around it and communicate with others in the developing countries using platforms, especially Facebook, as an economic tool. So many of these tools that exist already here are being very effectively used, and often in very creative ways in the developing world. New models for healthcare, for example, using smartphones, AI, et cetera, may really come out of usage in developing world where they don't have vested interests who are trying to block it or prevent it, which might be the case in the United States. So there's potential, again, because it's so cheap now, it's so democratized and so powerful. I mean, if you look at your cell phone, your smartphone, your iPhone 7, like I have here, I mean, that has more computing power than existed in the world in 1981. I mean, think about that. That's in your hand, right? And certainly far more powerful than anything that the President of the United States had 10 years ago. Access to all kinds of information, data, GPS, I mean, on and on and on, learning. AI is on it, right? And this is in the hands of people all over the world. I was told an example by one of the leading agricultural technology experts in the UK at a conference I spoke at, and she had been in sub-Saharan Africa in a village, very poor village, and this farmer she met with was illiterate, but he had a smartphone which had icons on it. He could go through his crops and get data on which crops, needed fertilizers or water or pesticides, all from his smartphone. But here's this incredibly advanced technology in the hands of a very poor illiterate farmer, using it to really improve the efficiency of his agricultural crop. So this technology can be used in many, many ways to improve the systems all over the world. I mean, we're seeing that, of course. Or I'll give you another example. That a simple one is that Twiga connects rural farmers in poor countries with street vendors. And the street vendors are selling, apples, oranges, whatever, vegetables. And how do they get their crop? How do they get their source of vegetables to sell on the street? That's pretty haphazard. And how do the farmers know what crops are needed and who needs them and what they should grow? Well, Twiga connects them, and through an Uberized kind of service, and it does mobile payments so that everybody gets paid, and Twiga picks up the product and delivers it to the vendor who can order it from these rural farmers. Well, that brings much greater efficiency, more income to people, and it's built on a very simple system. You can use even just plain old cell phones, not even necessarily have to have smartphones. And Hello Tractor allows people to rent tractors, very primitive tractors on little farms that people could never afford to own a tractor, but they can rent time on it. And it's all done through SMS or in some ways, and sometimes with smartphones. But anyway, these are examples where a lot of this stuff is being applied now, but needs to be scaled up and done globally. But I think, there's a lot of people out there working on it, the UN and UNICEF and, even World Bank people trying to find a different model for development. I've worked with them on this issue, and the UNCTAD people. UNCTAD just released a Technology and Innovation Review Report for 2018 that I recommend people to look at, because they're trying to look at this sort of bottom-up approach using advanced technology that's scalable and cheap, just to really address all the challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay. Well, all right. So to leave off, what are some resources that you'd recommend to help get entrepreneurs and thinkers into this mode where they can actually solve problems that matter and do it in the right way?
That's a really good question. There's not a lot of resources. I mean, Peter Diamandis's books, Abundance and Bold, are interesting, and I think that his basic point, and he goes and interviews all these people in different areas of technology that I've spoken about, his point is that we could have abundance in the world of clean water, of food, of good health care, all this. And so he goes and outlines the technologies. But what Peter doesn't deal with, he doesn't deal with policy and politics and culture. How do you make these actually happen, right? So he could talk about startups, and there's a lot of that discussion. But there's no real discussion there of this, creating the linkages between the actual need and the people on the ground that would be able to implement these technology innovations solutions and the people who invent them. So there is a broken circuit there. I think if you look at the new, as I said, the Technology and Innovation Review, you can just Google that and get it downloaded for free from UNCTAD, from the UN. That outlines an approach. But we need to create a kind of platform to connect all these people. And like I said, the Global Solutions Summit is one effort to do that. But I think it's missing, that somebody needs to say, hey, we need this platform and we need to put some resources into putting it together so we can connect people and connect the vision and the people with the need with the people who are doing the innovation. And again, I stress that I respect the people at Singularity and the people who come to their Global Solutions program and all, young entrepreneurs from all over the world who want to find technology solutions to the big problems that we all face. And they're trying to do that. But scaling that up and getting these startups even functioning as a viable business, and then scaling them up so that there's not 2 villages in the world that are using it, but there's 10,000 villages. That's a big challenge, and I don't think anybody has cracked the code on that. But I think we need to have much more dialogue about it. We could do it because we can bring together, theoretically anyway, we can bring together the people who are the implementers on the ground and people with the need with those who have the technology innovations. In fact, what we need to do is not only bring those together, but we need not just the push from people who come up with cool technology in Silicon Valley, but we need to pull people in these areas, these regions, these parts of the world that say, hey, we have this need. Can you help us meet this need? So the technology that already exists, can you turn it into something that's relevant to us or build a model? Or you can put more effort in science and technology to solve these problems and find scalable, reasonable, good solutions that we can then implement to solve our problem. So it's the lack of this network, of this communication, of this understanding between these 2 pieces, or maybe it's a much bigger set of pieces, but really between the need and the people developing the technology, that needs to be addressed. And I may be ignorant. Maybe there's somebody that's really doing this well. I just don't know about it. But I certainly think that's the problem. And I think, to your technology audience, who I, have great respect for, and they're trying to develop all these wonderful technologies, I think that's the big challenge. How can you, first of all, really tailor what you put your effort into to solving big problems, not just better apps to get your pizza faster, but something to really solve the kinds of problems that are facing the world, which in my view are going to get a whole lot worse if we don't start addressing them seriously, because we are headed, I say sometimes, as a civilization, we're headed to the cliff, but we're not going to go over a cliff because nobody saw it. There's plenty of people out there saying, hey, there's a cliff out there. You got to drive the car to the right, to the left, stop the car, do something different. Because if we keep going the way we're going, we're going to go over that cliff. And I think that's what we have to kind of realize, that we do understand a lot. In fact, I would argue we have never known more about the future as a species than we know now. We know a lot about the future. We know the trends. We know what climate change is doing and what's causing it and where it's going. We don't know all the details. We don't know where we might hit a tipping point. We know pretty much what kind of demographic problem we face in terms of growing populations. We know about resource depletion. We know about what's happening to the oceans and acidification and overfishing and massive amounts of plastics, 300 million tons of plastic in the ocean that's choking the environment and killing the fish. I mean, we know about so many of these problems, and we can see the trend of where they're going. So we're not looking at the world from a position of ignorance. We know where things are going, and therefore we know what we could do, or at least to start to find the solutions. And I'm counting all the young people out there, the ones who want to change the world and find the business models, find the technologies, but focus on the real problems, because I think we could have an abundant world. We can go to a world that is much better than the one we have now, not go over the cliff. But we aren't going to do it just by chance. It's going to take real effort and coordinated effort and real thought to where we're trying to go.
Well, very good, Benny. I really appreciate your thoughts and your insight. It's going to take a while to digest this, and I know we're out of time, but I appreciate you coming on the call.
Well, this is fun, Richard. I'd be happy to do it anytime. And I'd love to. When do you think you'll actually put this together and turn it into a podcast?
Coming to Dallas, Texas, September 14th, 15th, and 16th, 2018, the Blockchain and Future Tech Expo. This is going to be a gigantic conference of over 5,000 people. We're going to be talking about blockchain and its applications. We're going to be talking about quantum computing, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and several other future technologies that are poised to and actually changing our lives as we speak. Here's why you should attend. As you may know, early adopters are the ones that investigated and profited from things like the gold rush in the 1800s, from the dot-com boom in the 1990s, from the internet boom in 2005, from the smartphone explosion in 2007, from the real estate boom that ended in 2008, and of course, from the Bitcoin boom that started in 2012. Early adopters act now. They don't wait till later. They go out west first. In their covered wagons, they find the biggest gold nuggets. If you consider yourself an early adopter and you want to find the biggest nuggets, then you owe it to yourself to attend this upcoming conference. Blockchain is going to affect how we control and store our medical data, how we send money around the world, how we bank, and more. But artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and cybersecurity will play a pivotal role in our lives as well. And that's why our next event, September 14th to the 16th at the Dallas Convention Center, is going to have not only 5,000 plus attendees, but will showcase blockchain, AI, cybersecurity, quantum computing, and more. You want to get in on the coming gold rush of future tech and opportunity as an early adopter. Don't be left out. To register, go to bftexpo.com. That's blockchainfuturetechexpo.com. Thank you. You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.